Hi, Ottawa, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Chat with Derick. I am your host, Derick Fage, and if you love the movies like I do, I have so many wonderful memories. My best friend Gary and I going to films that we weren't even allowed into and sneaking in and paying for one film and sitting in and watching another. There was a period in my life where I was obsessed with going to the movies and probably taken that obsession from my father, who to this day, lockdowns not included, of course, goes to see a movie every Friday. It doesn't matter what's on. And our guest today is one of those people that is obsessed with film, and he's written an incredible book. It's called Real Ottawa, a memoir with the movie theaters we loved. I am joined by Dan Lalande, who is the author of this fabulous book. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Dan, let's talk about your love of film. Where did that come? Mine came from my father, because my father, as I just said, he loves going to the movies. He loves the experience. He's always said, what else can you pay? People complain about how much money it is these days, but he says, what else can you pay $15 for something that costs someone $200 or $300 million to put together? And those are some of the blockbusters. There's also some fantastic indie films, but that's the way he has always felt. What a great experience it is going to the theater. Where did your love of film come from?
Well, it's funny you should mention your dad, because while it's not the only influence, my dad definitely played a big part in it, because from a very young age, he was always taking me, when VHS technology came in and you could record stuff, wherever I was living, there'd be a knock on the door of the apartment, and it would be Dad with shopping bags full of stuff he recorded off television. And he'd say, "Oh man, Martin and Lewis, have you seen this? You got to see it." And he would, insist that I watch anything from quality to, well below B. But I did. I loved it all, and I watched it all. So Dad was definitely an influence. And in the book, which is a series of, little memoirs of my years growing up in Ottawa as what I call a movie juvie, a movie-loving juvenile
Right.
delinquent in the 70s and 80s, there are a lot of little segments that are devoted to, my time with Dad going to various movies.
Yeah, and it's changed quite a bit, Dan. When we look, there's these huge conglomerates now when it comes to the movie watching experience. I'm not taking anything away from them, but you talk about Ottawa's old movie theaters, and we just fortunately had great news about the Bytown. Of course, we have the
Mm-hmm.
Mayfair Theater. The Bytown looked like it was going to unfortunately close, but a couple of entrepreneurs have taken that over. But Ottawa's old movie theaters, tell us a little bit about what that used to be like. I mean, we still have a little bit of it today, but it was very different back in the day.
Yeah, back then, people forget and there's a whole generation that's grown up without this experience, what a big deal going to the movies was. This was not like, oh, well, I'll rent it when it comes out in video stores a month from now, or I'll see it on some streaming service, or it'll be on commercial television real soon. I mean, that didn't happen. It played in your, friendly neighborhood theater for a very short amount of time, unless it was so popular that it got held over. And after that, you weren't seeing it again for at least another 2 years before it showed up on the only ancillary market at that time, which was commercial television. And even then, it was going to be censored up to yin yang, and it was going to have commercials plastered all over it. So, this going on a Friday night, on a Saturday night, to what used to be, the Nelson Theater, the Elgin Theater, the Somerset Theater, this circuit of downtown theaters we had in Ottawa, all within relatively close proximity of each other.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. You showed up, you lined up early, you chit-chatted other people in line, you made friends. Sometimes you got lucky, you picked somebody up, Uh, you went inside, you sat there, the lights were, great sense of anticipation. And you came out all a buzz, and you had to go out for eating afterwards and talking about everything you saw, because, you had to absorb the movie much more in those days, because it had to last. You weren't going to see this thing again, except, as I said, in hacked up form 2 years from now. So if you went to see The Godfather, if you went to see Jaws, if you went to see the first Star Wars, you either went to see it repeatedly, or you kept those memories of it so dear it wasn't funny.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because you and I are both parents, and I'm sure you've gone through this too. Where in this day and age, as you said, the movies are available, 24/7. How many times did I have to watch the same movie with my children over and over again because they were obsessive? We didn't
Yeah,
necessarily have to
yeah,
talk about the movie because don't worry, in 2 days we'll
yeah,
be watching the same movie over
yeah,
again, right?
yeah. If I never see Thumbelina again, I'll be very happy. I'll be very happy.
I hear you. I want to talk about too. That must have inspired your career because you're an award-winning writer. You and I worked together many many moons ago at Rogers TV, where you're writing our promos for the station. It was
That's right. You were
was
doing the
this
morning show.
movie?
You were doing the morning show with TL Rader,
Yeah,
and I did the commercials for that show and all the other shows.
yeah. So was that part of your inspiration to get into that industry?
Certainly, the movies was where it began, and then interest in television as well. But the movies was always where I thought, okay, ultimately that's where you have to go in media because everybody knows that's the classiest product. That's the top of the mountain. You kind of you start off with a K car, where you say
Yeah.
someday I'm driving that Corniche, known as the movies. And I was lucky in that I had a very logical if you will, sort of set of stairs to get there. I started off in stand up writing one liners, and then I was in an improv and sketch comedy troupe on Elgin Street. We had our own club for many years. So I got to write sketch comedy. Out of that, we were recruited to write for children's television. So I wrote for You Can't Do That on Television, The Raccoons, those kinds of things. Then after that, we were invited to do low budget documentaries. We did those. From documentaries, we were allowed to do dramas and comedy series. I did those. And then from those ultimately came the movies. So it was a real nice logical progression.
You mentioned improv. That was Skid Row, wasn't it?
It was a very popular
Yeah.
comedy troupe here in town from about 1983 to I think 90 is when it ended.
Yeah, it
And
was
we had
it
our own
was
club
so
on Elgin for many
successful.
years.
Yeah, and
It
I
was huge. Yeah. It was huge,
yeah,
and I look back on that now. Talk about incredible training for creativity and learning how to think quickly. And I mean, we did wow at the height of it in the mid '80s. We would do let's see, we would perform from Wednesday night to Saturday night, 2 shows on Friday, 3 shows on Saturday because we'd also do a midnight show. And there was a lot of money in the city at the time. High tech was booming. There were conventions everywhere. So when we weren't performing, we were in a hotel, we were in a convention center. And some nights we had to juggle both the stage obligations and the convention obligations. So we do like an 8 o'clock show. It would end, or I guess we do a 7 o'clock show. It would end at about 8:30, while people were lined up to come in for the 9:30 show. We would run like hell to a hotel down the street. We do a convention for like salesmen, and then we'd come back and we do the second show at the club. And that was my life for almost 10 years. So it was a great fertile
yeah.
creative ground.
Well, and there was such a buzz about it as well. I mean, I can't even think of if you looked across the country, there weren't many people, there weren't many cities that kind of thing was happening, right?
It's true. I mean, obviously you had Second City in Toronto, but
Yeah,
that was successful. But that was a franchise started in Chicago that set up a Canadian contingent. Skid Row was Indigenous Ottawa through and through. I mean, it was Ottawa boys making jokes about Ottawa things.
yeah, yeah. Very unique experience. Let's talk about feature films because you've written for 5 feature films. Tell us a little bit about the films, and you've worked with some, I mean, huge names in your career.
Yeah, well, we had done. I say we. We had a kind of an offshoot when Skid Row went down in the '90s. We decided that we wanted to venture into writing, directing, that kind of stuff. So we did everything from documentaries to we were still writing for the animation racket at the time. We also did stuff for government, high tech, what have you. And like I said, high tech was booming at the time. There was a lot of money. And so you had a lot of bored millionaires in town looking for the next sexy, cool thing to put their money into. And
Yeah,
in the late '90s, there was a boom in independent feature film. All these festivals that were, showcases that were developing all around the world. And the technology was such that suddenly you didn't have to go to Hollywood. You didn't even have to go to Toronto. You can make a movie in your own backyard. It can even look so like the Blair Witch Project,
Yeah.
as long as it had a premise that excited people, you had something, or a stamp of approval from a festival that said, yeah, this is good. It's an official entry. A distributor would pick you up. So we went and we pitched these high tech dudes into investing into some feature films. And our first one was a very fun little comedy, spoof of mob films called Two's a Mob, did quite well.
Yes, I know the
Um,
one. Yeah.
yeah, but it had limited distribution because they said it's your biggest problem here is it's not stars, you don't have names. So as you make more going forward, as long as there's some marginal name, get a name. So we didn't have a lot of money, so we weren't going to get Tom Cruise or any of those $10 million guys, but we had
Right.
some. And because I knew the movies as well as I did, being a lifelong movie juvie, they said, Dan, you're in charge of procuring the stars for your scripts. Here's our budget. Here's the telephone. Find them. So I would call up all the agents and I would say, hi, production company here in Ottawa, Canada, and we're about to make a movie called blah, blah, blah. And we were wondering if. So I would kind of beat the bushes for who might be available that wouldn't break the piggy bank. And for example, Michael Moriarty was just coming off of his huge success in Law and Order on television because he had gone into
Okay.
hot water with the producers. He had some sort of hissy fit about he didn't like the political content of the shows. And he fought with the producers and they fired him and he walked from the show. And nobody would touch this guy in Hollywood because he was a political hot potato, even though he
Right.
just won like a whack load of Emmys for doing this show. So I thought, here's a guy who's looking for work. He's still a hot commodity. And as luck would have it, he had I think he'd fallen in love with a Canadian woman and he was living in Halifax at the time in
Really?
kind of a
Okay.
cave of solitude. Yeah. So I called up his
Yeah.
agent and the guy gave me a really hard time. He said, hey, man, Michael Moriarty, I'm not giving him away to just anybody. Send me the script and, we'll talk. He played this kind of game with me. So I was like, okay. So a couple of days later, we still had answering machines in those days. We turned on the answering machine at the office where me and my partners wrote and planned these movies. And there was a message on the answering machine. And it's the same agent. And now he's the nicest guy in the world. And he's basically, you can hear him on his knees. Hey, guys, guess what? Michael loves your script. Let's talk. I want to do this, because I got lucky. I wrote this little passage. I sent it to Moriarty, and he read it, and he really really liked it, and so he agreed for not very much money to come to town and to be in the film. And you got to remember that this is a guy who, when Tennessee Williams, the great playwright, wrote his
Yeah.
autobiography in 1973, in the last chapter he said, I boldly predict that the next greatest actor in America after Marlon Brando is going to be this guy, Michael Moriarty. So it's held in very high esteem.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And he
No
shows up
idea.
on the set. He shows up on the set. The guy's like 6 foot, like 9. He's huge, with a head like this big. And there's a myth about celebrities. They say they're short people with big heads, and most of them actually are. It's not quite the myth it's purported to be. But he's tall with a big
Right.
head, so he's really tall. So he comes up to me. He says, he's got this big gravelly voice. He said, where's the writer on this thing? Oh, where's the writer? Show me the guy who's the writer. And everyone nervously points at me. He says, you, come here. And I show up like, yes, sir, And I'm wearing a baseball cap. He goes, lift that thing. Okay, so I lift my baseball cap. And he bends down and he looks me in the eye. He said, you're the guy who wrote this script? And I said, yeah. Somebody told me that this is your first time you ever wrote drama? Because I've been writing comedy up to that point. I said, yeah. He said, it's good stuff, man. From now on, no more comedy. You're a dramatist. And I was like,
Really?
wow.
That's
Yeah.
incredible.
It was a hell of
I
a
can't
compliment.
imagine what that would. Yeah, I can't imagine what that would do for your confidence, especially
I tried not to
writing
wear it
your
on my
first
sleeve,
script.
man, but it was tough. Yeah. And then on the set itself, I wrote him a very nice passage that we shot. He was playing a guy who made instruments, violins and stuff. And we shot it on in a violin maker's office on Bank Street. And at one point, he did this long speech that I wrote for him. And this guy's rendition of it was so good that I looked around for who the writer was because there was no way it was me.
Really?
Because I can't write like that. I can't write like that. I was like, I don't know who wrote this, man, but that's not me. This is some guy with a lot of experience because this is good. And at one point, he did the speech and he drank a little tea. It was a prop, and then he did his speech. And the director said, "Cut. Hey, Michael, you know what? Really like the bit with the teacup. That was really, really, really a nice addition." And he said to him, "What are you, stupid?" And the director said, and Michael said, "You didn't hear it?" And he was like, hear what? And he said, "There was a truck coming down the street that was completely going to blow the take. So I picked up the cup of tea and I waited till the truck went by, and then I put the cup of tea and I picked it up." That's how good this guy was. That's
That's
how finely tuned
amazing.
his art was. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no kidding. You
So he was
also
cool.
worked with,
Another one was, go
I
ahead.
was going to mention Ernest Borgnine, but if you've got somebody else, please share.
You know what? So was I. One of my favorite people I ever worked with. Moriarty ended up being a very difficult character. Very schizophrenic character. But we had Eli Wallach, who was great. And Eli Wallach said, "Who you got coming next?" And we said, "Ernest Borgnine." He said, "Man, that guy's gonna give you no trouble. He's an old pro." And he was a total sweetheart. He was a total sweetheart.
Really, eh?
Showed up, was just the nicest guy. Would even help us like move lights and set up cameras. Here's a guy who was a 1955 Best Oscar winner. Hey, let me help you with that light.
Yeah,
There you go, sonny. And one day we were on Somerset Street
just
shooting
amazing.
we're shooting in a interior decorator's office on Somerset Street. And Borgnine was playing a mafia don. He's sitting behind his desk. And there's a break, and he comes out and he sits on Somerset Street, nice kind of summer day. And there's this little old lady, and while he's talking to me about the script, he's got one eye on this poor little old lady who looks a little confused and doesn't kind of know what's what. And he goes, hang on. And he gets up and he crosses the street, and he goes to this woman. He says, "Excuse me, ma'am, can I help you?" And she says, "Yes, I'm looking for whatever." She doesn't know who Borgnine is. And he looks at me like, "Where is that?" And I point that away. And he goes, "Okay, ma'am, come with me." And he walks this little old lady from, I don't know, Overbrook or something,
Yeah.
down to Bank Street and leads her in the right direction where she has to go. And she turns and says, "Oh, thank you." He's like, "Okay, ma'am, that's cool." And then he comes back and he goes in and he does his next scene. Like the nicest, most
Oh.
common, ordinary, no ego guy you ever met in your life.
Yeah, it's so refreshing, when you have stories like that about famous people. I'm just disappointed you never gave me a call, but we can talk about that off camera. Uh, Dan, I want to talk
I think
about
I met
the
you
writing
later. In my
process.
defense, I think I met you later.
That is true. I want to talk about just the writing process because you've authored a book, but you've done a lot of screenwriting. You've written, you mentioned comedy, stand up comedy, and those one liners. And as far as screenwriting goes, what is that process like for you? How did you and your team, even begin with an idea?
Ideas have never been a problem for me. I've always kind of had them. Um, there's lots of different ways. Some guys are plot guys. They start with a plot and they go like that. I had a writing partner for many years. He was primarily a plot guy. So when he and I wrote together, it was all the mechanics of the plot, and then he would kind of give it to me, and I'd worry about the characters, the motivation, the dialogue, all that stuff. And then he would look at it again to make sure that once I added all that stuff, none of it violated the tenets of the plot. So that was the way he kind of thought.
Okay.
That's one style of screenwriter. And then you have people from my school, which is basically it's character based. So I usually come up with a little hook because everything's kind of a hook, a cute little idea. And then once you've got your cute little idea, I kind of go, okay, what kind of person would get themselves in this kind of a situation or be involved in this kind of a situation? And then I just let I try to get in tune with the character as much as I can and just let the character kind of carry the action out. And I just let it all spill out. And I write dialogue first, just the dialogue. I speed
Really?
write all the dialogue. Yeah. I thought that was unique to me. And years later, I wrote that Orson Welles worked the same way. So I was like, woo, exalted company.
Did you
So I
ever
just do all the
record
dialogue.
dialogue? Because sometimes your brain works so quickly, it's difficult to type as quickly as your brain is coming up with these fabulous ideas and this amazing dialogue. Did you ever record and then write, or was it all simply just boom, I'm on the computer or typewriter, depending on what time we're talking about.
Yeah, the early days it was the typewriter. For a long time now, it's been the computer. But yeah, no, I just let it. I don't want anything to impede the flow, so I just go, and then I'll go back and I'll refine it. I'll kind of shore the dialogue up, and then I'll go back to the very beginning and I'll read it all out loud. Because as you say, that's a
Okay.
big litmus test. That's a huge litmus test. Because sometimes you read something, you go, man, that's great, and then you hear actors read it, and you go, man, that's terrible. You know, uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
But as somebody said
but
quite wisely, if you could read your own stuff and it doesn't embarrass you, then most of it works.
right. What about writing a book? This is your first book, so what was that process like? Was it a difficult transition for you to go from screenwriting to writing a book?
It is very different. I mean, some of the rudiments are the same, but it is very different. And when I could no longer write for TV and the movies simply because the opportunity temporarily dried up, I said, okay, well, what can I do for public attention? Because you're always looking for public attention. And I thought, well, I could write short stories and novels and nonfiction because you can do that by yourself and you can do it anywhere. So I decided I would become that kind of a writer. And I would say it took me, a good 7 years to make that transition because it's such a different
Wow.
art. Suddenly you gotta, when you write a movie, you're not writing any description. You write like interior house. Bob walks in and sees Marcia. Bob says, Marcia, what the hell are you still doing here? I told you to get out before I went to work. Marcia says, well, Bob, I've had a change of heart about our relation. That's kind of all you're writing. When
Right.
you're writing a novel, when you're writing a memoir, holy cow, there's, the cerulean blue sky dwarf the little green house at the edge of the lane. You got to add all that stuff. The dynamic between people, you've got to explain that a little bit. You have to kind of show visibly what in a movie the actors would imply. But now I really got to spell it out for an audience. So it's a very, very different form of writing. Especially memoir. This is memoir. That's very interior. That's almost like
Right.
therapy. So I'm delving into me and my dad on Somerset Street one snowy night, coming out of the Somerset Theater, and my dad and I lived in absolute poverty. The guy was having an extended midlife crisis. He barely had enough money to go to the movies, but he always found
Really?
it for me. Yeah, he found it for me. And one night, I remember this to also show you what a kind soul he was. And we're waiting for the OC Transpo bus back to our little apartment. And this old drunken guy comes up and says, "Hey, buddy, you got money for?" My dad's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And he takes out a $2 bill. That's how long ago this was. And he gives the guy a $2 bill. He goes, "Ah." The guy goes into a drugstore and buys a bottle of Aqua Velva or whatever. And then I see our bus coming, and I said to my dad, I said, "Hey, Dad, I meant to ask you, money wise for this week, like how much do we have, in the coffers?" And he looked with me with complete sincerity. And he said, "I just gave it away." And he gave the
Oh,
last two
really?
dollars we had to some drunken guy because he was like, "Oh, you poor guy, here you go."
Wow.
Like, yeah. So it was
That's
a
amazing
very
guy.
idiosyncratic, you know, experience living with him. That
What?
was dad. Mom had become a very successful middle class citizen, civil service.
Okay.
So I could go to her for creature comforts, and I could go to my dad for kind of the cultural, spiritual stuff. So as I explained in the book, it was this weird ping pong coming of age, where I was kind of respectable middle class guy this way, and then I was bohemian artist guy kind of that way. And to this day, I'm both those guys. I live in this nice
Right.
upper middle class circumstance, but at heart, I'm still a guy who goes to the movies, writes screenplays, hangs out with other artists. I'm still this bohemian artist on the inside.
What are you working on now, Dan?
Well, I have a whack load of other books. I'm proud to say,
Oh,
um,
excellent.
some of which
Okay.
will be some of which will be coming out soon, and some of which are things I'm writing on spec. The two I'm hoping will come out soon from the same publisher who put out Real Ottawa, Ottawa Press and Publishing. the guy behind it, you probably know him, a local hero by the name of Ron Corbett, who used to
Yes.
write for the Citizen of the Sun and was on radio for
Yeah.
many years. Yeah,
Great
and he
author
runs this
himself.
publishing
Yeah.
company. Yeah, he runs this publishing company, puts out his own books and seeks out local authors and gives them a real good spotlight. Puts together a nice looking book, and then gets you in all of the bookstores in Eastern Ontario. So I'm in the
Fantastic.
Independents. I'm in Chapters. Yeah, no, he does a good job. So I got a couple more I'm going to pitch to him. One is a collection of short stories I've been working on for a long time. And the hook there is that each story takes place in a different neighborhood in Ottawa. So story set at the Glebes, story set in Manor Park, story set on the canal, what have you. Prospectively, it's called Ottawa in Short, which I'm hoping he'll go for.
I like it.
And then a bigger one that I'm working on, I've been working on it on and off for 2 years, is a critical compendium of film comedy of the 1970s. So I've watched all 160 comedies released that year, and I've done like 2 to 3 pages on each one. And this will go off to some
Really?
academic presses. Yeah, this will go off to some academic presses
Wow.
in the States in hope that somebody bites. So those are my two biggies.
Is there a lot of opportunity for a writer artist like yourself here in Ottawa?
Well, I've been very lucky, you got to appreciate that when I was coming of age here, the population of the city was about 350,000. So when people say, oh, Ottawa's more like a small town, it's not so true now. Boy, was it true back then. So
Mm.
the idea that someday I'm going to write for TV, I'm going to write for movies, even like I'm going to stand up on stage and tell jokes. Everybody said, you can't do that here. There's no infrastructure. How are you going to do that here? You got to go to Toronto. You got to go to Montreal. You got to go to the States. But somehow, I got lucky enough that all these projects suddenly started to come through Ottawa. And while I was just kind of standing here plying my trade with one hand on a suitcase ready to go, along came You Can't Do That. Along came the Raccoons. Along came a chance to make movies. Along came a chance, to write books. So I've been very lucky that here I am on the brink of 60 years old, and it's all I've done all my life without leaving Ottawa.
Well, Dan, you're one of the funniest people I've ever met. As a matter of fact, I should say I just did an interview recently too with Mark Sutcliffe, and he said to say hello.
Ah,
And when I said,
nice.
Dan Lalande, one of the funniest people I've ever met, he said, "Oh my goodness, absolutely one of the most quick-witted people, one of the most talented writers in the entire country, let alone the entire city." So we both and so many people have a great respect for your writing. Dan,
You
can't
don't know
thank you
how
enough for
sorry
joining
I am.
us.
You don't know how sorry I am hearing you say that, and you're not blonde with a really nice build. But
Dan, thanks so
I'll
much for
take it.
spending time with us. Really appreciate it. Dan Lalande,
Okay.
author of Real Ottawa, and of course you can pick that up in just about anywhere books are sold. You can check it out online, get a copy of the book, and walk down memory lane of this fantastic history we have of Ottawa theater and just love of film. This has been another episode of Let's Chat with Derick with your host Derick Fage. We'll see you next time.